Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Ambassador, Andras, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's a pleasure for me to be here. We've met with Andras a few weeks back, few weeks, in Brussels, and spoke about the achievements of Rakvere and how they fit into the broader context of our efforts overall in Europe with respect to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, not only improving the energy efficiency in cities, but generally reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And as Andras just said, Rakvere has been at the very forefront and one of the most ambitious achievers. But we have also heard from the ambassador just now that it's not only Europe that is actually seeing the importance of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. It's a global trend, and it's good to be in the same company with the US on this effort. So I thought that I would contribute a bit to the discussion today by taking a broader picture and speak not necessarily only about the smart city concept, but also about the sustainable efforts for sustainability in Europe. And I will perhaps refer a bit to what my colleague from the Commission said earlier before, perhaps add a few details to some of the elements, but then talk about another initiative, the Covenant of Mayors, and perhaps at the end we could think together how we can see those two initiatives converging in the future, because that would really help to get the most out of the activities in cities like Rakvere. First of all, perhaps this is a bit too obvious to say, but maybe it's a good start to remind everybody that we are really seeing a complete revolution in energy systems, a revolution that is perhaps inevitable if we want to meet our targets of reduction of CO2 gases, if we want to convert our systems towards more sustainable and renewable sources of energy, but also if we want to make our energy systems more competitive. We have been going in Europe through a very ambitious plan of changing the energy system into a market-oriented one, creating a single market for energy. And the year 2014 has been agreed as an important milestone by which a large part of Europe should be actually completely connected and becoming a common European market. You will also see that you will also recall that we have very recently seen an agreement of our leaders on new targets, not only for 2020 that have been driving so far the transformation of the energy system, but also for 2030. And they again include quite high numbers for reduction of greenhouse gases and for introduction of renewables. What is important to realize that with all these trends, we will see in the future an increasing reliance on electricity in our society. In an exercise that we have prepared, a modeling exercise that we have prepared a few years ago, Roadmap 2050, we looked at the different possible paths that would lead us to a sustainable future in 2050. And we took different assumptions on the basis whether the sustainability would be achieved with more renewables or more nuclear and combinations, etc. But no matter which assumptions we actually took with respect to energy uses for not only things like lighting, but also heating, transport, industry, we always ended up with an increase in the electricity use by about a third. So that's an important element to keep in mind when we think about transforming our energy systems for the future. Now, why are cities important? Not only because 3/4 of our European population lives in cities, but also because most of the emissions that we want to reduce come from cities. Greenhouse gas emissions come from cities, and they predominantly come from the use of buildings or activities in buildings and in facilities, and for transportation. So the greenhouse gas reduction potential is the largest in these sectors, and they are largely concentrated in cities, and that actually puts the cities at the center of greenhouse gas reduction efforts. Now, Axel has already introduced the concept of smart cities as an innovation partnership construction or an instrument. Perhaps it's good to recall that it has been a very steep learning curve, or perhaps a good success story, because if you think that we started with the smart city idea only in 2011. It's not that far ago. 3 years ago, with the initial endowment of about 81 million and focused specifically on energy. But very quickly, I think we realized that the concept of smartness does not concern only energy itself, and it has to be actually thought about in an integrated manner. And that's how the innovation partnership concept 1 year later, 2012, came, already bringing together not only energy but also transport and ICT into a comprehensive program. And with that, also the funding has grown, and it has acquired more regular structures. Axel spoke about the high-level group and the Sherpa group, and we also have a smart city stakeholder platform where the bottom-up processes are also nurtured. Now, without repeating what has been said about the allocations under Horizon 2020 and the Lighthouse projects and the invitation for commitments that has been launched earlier today, just perhaps two slides. We have seen this one, so I will not re-explain again. I rather want to highlight what Axel said when he was explaining the slide, and he talked about the importance of the follower cities and the replication potential. I think this is crucial, and I think it's the innovative feature of smart cities that compared to previous funding efforts, we are now really looking at a high replication potential. And I stress this because I want to come back to it in a few minutes later on when I talk about the Covenant of Mayors. Now, this is the second aspect of smart cities, the invitation for commitments that was launched earlier this year and closed in the summer. And as Axel said, we had about 3,000 partners. This gives you, I'm glad I don't have only exclusively slides that he has already been showing. This one he hasn't shown. So here is a map that actually gives you a bit of an impression of how geographically spread the commitment from the partners are, or where the partners come from, which I think shows a fairly good coverage of Europe overall. You see Estonia with 6 up there, although you will notice that the main bulk comes from Italy and Spain, and that actually coincides with the membership of individual cities in the Covenant of Mayors that I will talk about in a few moments, where we also have a heavy concentration of signatories from Spain and Italy. Now, why is it important to invite cities, to incentivize cities to think smartly about their energy systems? Not only because of the greenhouse gas reduction potential that we see in cities, but also because it's the city energy systems that are really changing in numerous ways and need to be and the reactions to it need to come in an intelligent manner. If you put yourself in the shoes of someone responsible for the system, for the energy system in the city, and if you try to think beyond just efficiency improvements in individual buildings and just beyond savings through better operation of buildings, better heating system, you see that the overall concept of energy consumption and production in the city is changing. We used to be all running on a system where power generation was centralized, and then it was distributed through almost a one-way street distribution systems to our homes, to the buildings, to the factories. We are now seeing more and more development of decentralized power generation sources. Most frequent example is the photovoltaic panels that people put on their roofs, but we also see small size wind generators. And all this means that not only the system is changing from centralized generation of electricity in several large installations into a system with a number of small installations, but it also changes the flows in the energy system. Instead of one-way street from the power plant to the buildings, we are now actually coming to a system where also in the small cables in the streets, energy may actually flow in 2 directions. This is completely new for the energy companies that run the energy systems in the cities. It used to be a normal business for those companies that run the long-distance overhead power lines, high-voltage cables. But for the local distribution of electricity, this is a completely new reality, and that obviously creates a lot of complications, and it comes in parallel with the emergence of new trends, new types of consumption. It's not only anymore the lights and perhaps the machinery that consumes electricity. Now more and more consumption comes from things like heat pumps or electric vehicles, or in the future perhaps even storage, small storage technologies that will enable people to store energy at times when it's conveniently priced. So all this actually changes the realities, the energy realities in cities, well beyond the need to just be efficient and save money by consuming less energy. It actually forces us to completely rethink the system in which we not only consume but also generate energy in our cities. Now, the solution to this is very often offered in the form of smart grids. Smart grids as energy infrastructure that combines the traditional transmission of electrons with transmission of data and brings actually the measurement and collection of data to the individual consumption or production points, and brings the data across the grid in order to monitor and map the situation in the grid at various parts of the grid in real time. Now, such technology enables a lot of new things that are not possible in the traditional grid. It not only allows the operator of the grid to see well what happens despite the fact that the grid becomes very complicated and two-way. It allows the management of flexibility much better, because it's easier to actually understand in which parts of the grids you are facing constraints, which in translation then means that you can bring in more renewables which are characterized by their intermittency, by variation, unprogrammable variation in time. And it ultimately also brings cost efficiency. Although smart grid is something that obviously means a higher initial investment, because you need to add the necessary IT components to it, in the long term it actually becomes more cost efficient. And the projects where smart grid has already been realized brought down overall over the period of the investment cost down by 30%. So you can actually get the same functionality from the you can get the same extent with higher functionality and with 30% less cost. Very important aspect of smart grid is that it actually allows consumers to become active players in the system, to actually start selling energy that they produced from their PV panels, or modulate energy in time and decide to consume in periods when actually energy is cheaper, and resist from consumption in periods when it's more expensive, without actually feeling any discomfort. Now, this goes on top of the ordinary efficiency improvements in buildings, because this actually turns buildings not only efficient and low cost, or perhaps low or zero emission, but it also turns them into active components in the energy system, and that is very important for the future. Now, you cannot have a fully functioning smart grid that serves well the consumer and brings the consumer in without perhaps a final step of the smart grid extension in the home, and that's a smart meter. Smart meter, key for a consumer empowering smart grid. So it's good to have a look at where we stand with smart meters in Europe, and we see that we have now 19 member states that are actually planning to roll out smart meters between now and 2020. 3 of them have already done it: Sweden, Italy, Finland. They have already achieved a complete. Everybody in these 3 member states is equipped with a smart meter, so a meter that actually not only allows them to measure once a year when the bill comes, or before the bill comes, their consumption, but actually allows them permanent interaction with the system, permanent measurement to know how much they consumed yesterday, how heavy is their energy profile at the given moment, to obtain historical data, compare themselves, and also understand which type of consumption, which appliances in their home are actually costing them what part of their bill, which is important, again, for energy efficiency, because you can see whether you are actually losing money perhaps on your old fridge or whether it's the heating system that actually costs you a lot. So apart from these three that already have completed it, there are 13 more member states that plan a full-scale rollout between now and 2020, and Estonia is there. Estonia has started and should be finished by 2017. There are 3 more which are not listed on the slide: Slovakia, Latvia, and Germany, that do not plan a full-scale rollout. Nevertheless, they also have a plan how to equip part of their consumers with smart meters by 2020. And they have done specific analysis to identify who those consumers are, and they roll out meters only for those where it actually proved to make economic sense. For the 13 countries, or actually the 16 countries, they have decided for a full-scale rollout. Their analysis showed that actually the full population is proving a potential cost-benefit analysis. So these are trends or technology developments that we see going on in Europe, somehow in parallel perhaps to improvements in efficiency, and the question is how do we actually bring them all together? How do we actually build on the first steps taken in cities, and how do we make use of the rollout of these technologies to actually combine it together into integrated systems? Perhaps I should also say that smart grids are not only smart meters, although this represents a significant investment, and all this together, if materialized as planned, will result in about 35 billion euros invested in Europe by energy companies. There is also investment in smart grids in the other parts of the infrastructure, apart from smart meters, all the substations, equipment, etc. And so far we have spent in Europe collectively, member states together, spent over 3 billion euros, and there are plans for further expenditure. The projects that are currently underway themselves account for about 6 billion euros. We do this update annually. We track all the smart grids projects that we are aware of in Europe, and we see quite a stark growth. The update that was just published, which concerns 2013, monitors 459 smart grid projects. The year before, the number was at 281. So it actually shows you the year-on-year growth in a significant number. What is also important is that a large part of the investment is no longer in R&D, but actually goes to demonstration. It's not yet getting us through the valley of death that Axel was talking about, but it means that a number of projects are actually getting ready to be at least at the starting line of the valley. What is perhaps less ideal is the fact that most of the investments are concentrated in a few member states. 75% of the 3.15 billion so far are concentrated in 7 member states: Spain, Italy, France, Germany, UK, Netherlands, and Denmark. So the rest of the 21 other member states account for 1/4. So I think we need to bring those investments, those technologies, also to the other member states in Europe, both in the western part and in the eastern part, and that certainly is a challenge for the incoming period. Now, why do I mention all this? Why do I actually, perhaps a bit impolitely, talk not only about efficiency but also about smart grid? And we are here in a city that has done a lot in efficiency improvements and energy savings in public buildings, in private homes. And why are we not satisfied with it? Why do we actually say we need to do also other things? Because, as I said, the transformation of the energy system is asking for more. It's bringing new challenges that cannot be handled by energy efficiency improvements alone, but also because every year a new type of issues emerges, and this year has been under the sign of security of supply, as you will all know. We have not only seen disturbing developments to the east of our European Union territory, but we have also seen a potential quite significant impact on our energy security of supply. And where do I actually say this? Well, in one of the member states that is quite heavily dependent on continuous gas supplies from the east, from Russia. There are 6 member states altogether that are 100% for gas dependent on Russia. Overall, in Europe, we spend about €1 billion a day on our procurement of gas from Russia, and that is a significant number. The supplies from Russia accounted for 40% of our natural gas imports in 2013. So we need to be worried about what happens out there in the east, and we also need to be thinking about how can actually our energy systems be made more resilient. And energy efficiency is indeed one of the ways to make our energy systems resilient, but it's certainly not the only one. We have come in May. We have come up with a full list of action areas that we believe need to be at the forefront of our efforts across the EU in order to reduce our vulnerability towards any external shock, particularly shock from the east. And moderating energy demand is certainly one of them. But the development of further technologies, increasing energy production from within the European Union is also an important part of the action plan. Now, if we are talking about increasing energy production within European Union, a large part of it will mean more renewables. And as I explained previously, you cannot integrate high proportion of renewables without changes to the way we manage our energy system, without changes to the energy grid, and without equipping the grid with smarter technologies. Now, in this strategic document that we published in May, we have made a special call on local communities to be involved and to work towards changing the energy reality on the ground. Some of the work obviously has to be done by member states, has to be done in the capitals. Diversification of external supplies very often goes through government-to-government agreements, and therefore will be in the hands of central governments. But things like energy technologies, things like local production of energy, things like moderation of energy demand can most effectively be done actually at the local level. And therefore the document that we published in May also includes a call on municipalities and local governments to be active, specifically those that are members of the Covenant of Mayors. The Covenant of Mayors is a voluntary initiative or voluntary association of municipalities that since 2008 have been joining a club, if you want, and committing themselves to achieve more than 20-20-20 targets by 2020. It started in 2008 as a way of actually promoting the 2020 targets and saying every city that is ready to say, we will contribute, we will show how it's possible to reach a 20% reduction of greenhouse gases, 20% improvements in efficiency, and increase renewables production by 20%. Everyone who was ready to actually sign a formal commitment to this was welcome to the Covenant of Mayors. We originally thought that we would get about a dozen, perhaps 2 dozens of cities that would function as examples, as perhaps lighthouses, and could be used as good pupils in a way for illustration. By now we have ended up with over 6,000 signatories, and the numbers are increasing all the time. And we have signatories not only in the EU itself, but also across the world. But the main bulk is is in Europe. And as you can see, it's Spain, Italy that actually account for the highest numbers. The membership of the Covenant of Mayors is voluntary, but it's not completely for free. If you, as a city, accede to the Covenant, you are obliged to prepare an action plan, a strategic energy action plan. And in that plan, you have to show how you are going to meet the reductions, which is exactly why it's possible to say that Rakvere has already achieved it, because it was one of the first signatories. It has submitted amongst the first a strategic action plan. And in that action plan, it committed itself to a trajectory of greenhouse gas reductions. 4,000 other cities have already submitted the action plans. The difference obviously is partly driven by the fact that signatories have 1 year to submit their action plan. So some of the signatories from the 6,000 are very recent ones, so they haven't yet submitted. But some of them are members that have signed some time ago, and they haven't submitted an action plan as well already yet. But as much as the Covenant is a voluntary association, it actually requires certain discipline. So some cities that do not fulfill the obligation of submitting an action plan within a year, perhaps they get a warning. They get a second warning. It's not just 1 year and that's it. But some cities already have seen themselves delisted from the Covenant, because even after some reminders, they were not able to come up with the action plan. So it's voluntary. It's formalized through the SEAPs, but it doesn't involve disbursement of financial support in any way. But it's not a complete free-for-all. It requires certain discipline. If the discipline is maintained, then the potential of the Covenant is quite enormous. This is a overall picture looking at the commitments taken up in the strategic energy action plans and showing how much can be saved from where. And as you see, quite consistently with the picture showing the reduction potential and the distribution of emissions across the different sectors, it is again the building sector that contributes the most, followed by transport. But as I said, the Covenant is not looking exclusively only at efficiency improvements. It's looking at improvements of the energy situation in a comprehensive manner. So it also incentivizes switch to renewable power generation. And there again, important achievements not only in transport, where it's most obvious because you can switch to electromobility, but also in buildings and importantly in local electricity production, 31%. So these are the achievements. These are the changes achieved precisely by equipment of buildings with PV panels and use of distributed generation, for example, also in the form of wind power. So now, I think to close, where do we go from here? We have, as we heard earlier today, we have a very structured and clear program for smart cities. It supports lighthouse projects and is able to actually support lighthouse projects through Horizon 2020. The average allocation to lighthouse projects will be in the range of several dozen billion euros. So it actually helps some exemplary projects to get off the ground. But we also have this massive 6,000 cities that are trying to reduce their energy impact and improve their energy independence as well in the latest context, that are there adopting their strategic energy action plans and going through the rigor of implementing them. So I think the most obvious would be to seek synergies between the two and try to make sure that as soon as the lighthouse projects and the smart city partnership results get through the valley of death and actually demonstrate the value of their individual approaches, that we actually make full use of the covenant as a platform for replication of these successes, and making sure that the achievement of the individual smart city projects get actually full value, or we perhaps get full value out of them through bringing them to the knowledge and to the understanding of all the covenant signatories, and help the covenant signatories to learn from the selected low, perhaps, number of winning or successful lighthouse projects, and make them universally spread across Europe. It's good that the Smart Cities campaign looks at a variety of projects, because obviously the covenant signatories are also very differentiated in terms of their needs. Some are small cities, some are bigger cities, some try to solve more the issue of dependency on an external supplier, gas-based power generation and heat. Others solve rather problem of perhaps transport congestion. The possibilities are obviously endless. So it's important to have a choice of multiple successes from the smart cities, and not all of them will be equally useful and applicable to all covenant signatories. Nevertheless, the mass of the covenant signatorship certainly should give a possibility for everybody to find a good, for every smart city concept, to find a good potential group of replicators under the covenant. And that's something that I would want to invite everybody to work towards. Certainly, the cities that are engaged in both, or at least in one, but know of others that are engaged in the other form, in order to really bring cities together within member states, but also across the borders. And if that is something that we could help with, we will certainly be happy to do so together with colleagues in DG Move, as well as the other services of the Commission. Thank you for your attention.